Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us for Stop Monocropping Food System Solutions. If you wouldn't grow that way, why work that way? This is the keynote session of the Mass Food System Collaborative's 2021 forum. Of course, we had hoped we were all going to be together for this, but it's great to see so many of you here. We're looking forward to a good discussion. I'm Winton Pitkoff. I'm director of the collaborative. And this has been a really busy year for all of us, for all of you, with continued high levels of food insecurity brought on by the pandemic, record rainfalls and other weather anomalies thanks to climate change, supply chain challenges that we've all been talking about that have affected every aspect of the food system, pressures on labor, and the pandemic itself, which has fundamentally changed the way we all work and interact with each other. I think one thing we can say for sure is that there's more awareness of food system issues among the general public and among policymakers than ever before. And that's in part because the pandemic forced people to be aware of food in ways that they hadn't before, but it's also because of you and because of the advocacy and the education that you all do every day. The conversation is changing. The conversation about how we produce food, about how we make it available to people, how deep racial inequities are evident in every aspect of the food system, and how the food system interacts with the environment, with the built environment, with education is changing. And I think that can be a great first step towards real transformational change. And this year's forum is an opportunity to look broadly at how the various parts of the food system intersect and support each other, and how they sometimes put pressure on each other, and about how all of your work can help the local food system be more sustainable, equitable, and resilient. And we hope these sessions will add to your thinking about the issues we discussed and their connections to your work, and about how we can all work more collaboratively towards our shared goals. We'd especially like to thank our sponsors listed on the slide here for their support. Thanks to them, we've been able to keep forum registration free for everyone for this year. Some of the usual housekeeping reminders for today's call: please keep yourself on mute during the presentation. Introduce yourself in the chat if you'd like, with your name and your organization and preferred pronouns if you're comfortable with that. Please use the chat for questions at any time, although we'll hold questions till the end of the presentation. And we are recording the session to post online. Following the presentation, there's going to be some breakout sessions to give you all an opportunity to network a little bit and consider some of what we've learned. We hope you'll join us for those conversations. So our keynote speaker is Jessica O'Neill. Jess is the executive director of Just Roots, a food justice nonprofit organization in Greenfield. Jessica helped establish the organization and led their effort to really transform the community-supported agriculture model to be equity-centered and accessible to an economically diverse membership. And now they operate the largest SNAP-enrolled CSA of its kind in Massachusetts. Jessica is a true systems thinker, and her thinking about food impacts and is informed by everything from the community fair that she runs to her deep commitment to equity and justice. And she has titled her address, "Stop Monocropping Food System Solutions. If you wouldn't grow that way, why work that way?" And with that, I'll turn it over to Jessica.
Thank you so much, Winton, for that nice introduction. As Winton said, my name is Jessica O'Neill. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm really excited to be here with you today. And just to give us a roadmap of where we're headed, let's take a look at the agenda. Hold on, let me see. My slides are not advancing. There we go. Okay. So, I'm gonna make some introductory comments, but then we're gonna really look at, a framework for how we think about the whole totality of the food system. And what we're gonna take a look at challenges to the food system, and I'm gonna give you all a chance to share with us your thoughts on the challenges of the food system. Then we're gonna move into solutions, like how do we work more holistically? How do we work differently? Who do we work with to approach sustainable food system solutions? And I'll share with you some stories of some examples of some of the innovative work that is happening right here in Massachusetts across sector to build sustainable food system solutions to the challenges that we face. And then we'll run into a question answer section of the program. And for that, we're going to use the chat. So throughout the presentation, I would invite you to place your questions in the chat. Winston's going to help me out by looking for themes. And when we get to the Q&A section, We'll spend about 10 minutes trying to address as many of those questions as possible. If we don't get to your question, I've put my email in the chat. Feel free to follow up with me afterwards and I'll do my best to get back to you. And as Winton said, we're going to have breakout groups to reflect on what we've heard today, to reflect on how that might be helping us to think differently about how we work and who we work with. And those will be facilitated breakout groups. We'll tell you more about that when we get there. And then we'll come back together. We'll report on the highlights. What did we hear in those breakout groups? And then we'll close. So again, thank you so much for deciding to spend your time with us today. Really glad to be here with you. So when Winton Forrest called me and asked me to do this, I'm pretty sure my response to him was something like, why me? And that response came from the fact that I don't consider myself an expert on the food system. I consider myself an expert on the work of Just Roots, but I don't believe any of us are food systems experts on the whole. We're experts in our field. We're experts on one solution or another, but we're not experts on the whole thing. Why is that? It's because it's really big, it's really complex, it's interconnected. There's so many parts, moving parts, components, relationships, impacts. No one of us can be an expert on it all, but that can lend itself to working in really siloed ways. And that doesn't mean that we're working alone, but it means that when we are doing work, when we're trying to build solutions to the challenges that we're facing in our food system, that we're not taking a holistic approach, that we're not taking into consideration the whole of the system and all of its impacts when we're building those solutions. And so I'm hoping, and when we do that, we cause unintended harm. And, you know, best solution ever, causing harm somewhere else is not sustainable, right? So I'm hoping that today I can inspire you to think about the food system more holistically and to spark your interest in working differently and perhaps with different partners than you ever thought you would before. So as I said, I'm not a food systems expert. I've dedicated my professional life to working in the food system, to, in my case, reinventing the CSA as an equitable model for, as a model for food equity. And over the last decade, as Winton said, I've helped to transform the organization to become more diverse, but importantly, more sustainable, to really launch a model for food system solutions. And the only way that we've been able to do that is in partnership with others. We've learned a lot of lessons along the way, some from successes, more from failures. But the biggest lesson of all is how to work in true partnerships with others for the greater good and to really create sustainable solutions that last. So let's dig into what a framework of the food system looks like. And this is borrowed from the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. And despite its age, I picked it because I believe that it offers us a really simple and, pardon the pun, digestible way of looking at a really complex system, which is the food system. And it doesn't matter if we're looking at the food system locally, regionally, globally, nationally, no matter what, it's a complex system. And so we shouldn't be starting to think about challenges or putting together solutions without grasping the totality of the system. Because when we do that, as I said, we cause unintended harm. So this is one framework. It's certainly not it's not the only framework, but as I said, I think it gives us an opportunity to really think about the system holistically. So let's take a look at what this is telling us. The middle of the circle in yellow, it's saying that a sustainable food system doesn't allow for high rates of poverty, and it doesn't make space for high rates of food insecurity. If we have these things, we don't have a sustainable system. It's not working, right? So we've got to, everything we do, the actions we take, need to consider what our impact is on our poverty rates, on our food insecurity rates. In the blue section, we've got the actions and actors, right? Things that we're doing in the food system. So our farm, we're producing food, we're aggregating food, we're distributing food, we're consuming food, we're packaging food, we're creating food waste, we're dealing with that food waste. All of those activities, part of the food system. All of those activities require other things. We need a labor force. We need people that have skills, certain knowledge. We need finance, you name it. So we need, these are all the parts that make the food system tick, right? But all of those actions and all of those actors have an impact and are impacted by societal elements. So what are the laws, what are the restrictions, policies that are helping to amplify our work, making our work possible? And what are the laws, policies that are restricting our work and making it harder to come up with sustainable solutions? What are the policies that are pinning one sector against another sector? And what are the social cultural norms? Who are we growing food for? How are we distributing food? Is it equitable? Who has access to food? Is the food that we're producing relevant to a diverse population? And all of those social elements and all of the core system components have everything to do with our environment, right? Our air, our soil, our water, climate change. We're in the face of climate change. We're being forced to understand how to farm differently. When we let's take monocropping for an example here. So when we're monocropping, that's great well, hold on, that's going to be the next slide. So let's just quickly review before we go to the next thing. So a system cannot exist that's sustainable, that promotes poverty and promotes food insecurity. We've got lots of actors, lots of activities. Those activities have impact society, and society impacts it. And all of that needs healthy natural resources to function well. The solutions we're creating have to be in consideration of all the things that we just saw, but they also have to be vetted through a triple bottom line. And what I mean by that is when we think about the economy, society, and the environment, we can't be creating a solution for one that harms another. If we do that, again, we're not creating a sustainable solution for our food system. So I'm going to take monocropping as an example. Monocropping oftentimes means that you're really efficient at what you do. You're good at what you grow, this one thing. You've got really good efficiencies. You've got, therefore, really good net profits. And yet, that's so great for the economy, right? The circle at the top. Not so great for the environmental impacts because of fertilizers, soil degradation, climate change, you name it. Also not great for the societal impacts because oftentimes that food isn't necessarily available to marginalized populations, for example. So our solutions need to be vetted through this triple bottom line to ensure that we're not causing harm in one of the other areas when we're creating a solution for one. So just some quick examples of what would sustainability look like in each of these circles. So within the economic sustainability, we would be looking for stakeholders in the food system that are financially viable, that have market demand for the products that they're producing, that are taking care of their workforce with good wages, good working environments, and they have an ability to respond to success. So we see success, we see demand go up, they can respond to that demand, supply and demand. So from a society perspective, we're looking for equitable distribution and access to food, inclusive of marginalized populations. Again, reducing poverty, reducing food insecurity. And then environmentally, full stop, positive or net zero impact on the environment. We have to deal with we cannot ignore the impacts on the environment that agriculture creates. So the last two slides are tools that I hope you'll take back with you as you consider how you're doing your work. Best case scenario, you adopt these tools into your workflow, and you start using them as a way to vet the challenges that you're facing and who you might work with to create the solutions and to make sure your solutions aren't causing harm and a problem that someone else has to solve down the road. And when you do this in a really inclusive way, you're able to identify potential partners that you may not have thought about working with before, and also make sure that you're not causing unintended harm. So this is a sentence that I've heard over and over and over in my career in the food system. The food system's broken, right? We've probably all heard that. And so right now I'm going to take a minute or two, and I'd love to invite you to enter into the chat. And I'm not talking paragraphs and sentences, I'm talking words. Tell us where are the areas of the food system that you see that are broken? Where are the challenges? What are the challenges that we're facing in the food system? So take a minute or two and just enter in the chat from your perspective, from your vantage point. Why is the food system broken? And I'll try to read some of those out before we go to the next slide. So we'll just take a minute here to do that. So I'm seeing big ag, control of food production. We need good training for farmers, focus on profits, food deserts, greed, focusing on efficiency, too much big ag, capitalism, people can get cheaper food than we can grow, wage issues, competing priorities, food waste while people go hungry, more accessibility to foods that don't harm our body, racism, capitalism again, genocide, yep, colonization, federal support for commodity crops instead of nutritious food, yep, poor nutrition, policies, lack of accountability, supply chain barriers, land access, yep, particularly for people of color. And it's slowing down. Great, thank you. That's a long list. I'm just going to minimize that for myself. So yeah, a long list of challenges. I don't disagree with any of them. And the list grows ever longer, I'm sure. But the other side of that is there's a lot of us that are out there trying to fix the food system. Let's see, hold on, I'm going to advance the slide. There we go. So we're out there trying to fix it, right? How do we do that? How do we do that through that working differently, more holistic lens of building solutions to the food system? You know, in order to find effective solutions to reduce poverty and food insecurity and to promote health for the economy, society, and the environment, we have to start working together. We have to stop monocropping the ways that we work that disallow us to think about the whole system and to cause unintended harm. So no matter what sector you're working in, and that could be you're cooking food, you're working at a food pantry, you're distributing food, you're packaging food, wherever you're working in the food system, let's recognize that it's hard work. And especially in the last 2 years with the pandemic, it's even harder. It's hard physically, it's hard mentally, and it's hard emotionally. And while we're doing this work and while we're looking to fix this broken system, we have to take care of ourselves and we have to take care of our collective, because the finish line is not in sight, guys. We have a long way to go, and we need to do it in partnership with each other, with consideration to those tools we saw, the whole system, and vetting our solutions through the triple bottom line. So let's talk a little bit more about what we're fixing, what we saw in the chat. I've captured some of it, but the biggest challenge I think that faces our food system, and it gets back to the center of the circle of the framework of the food system itself, which is food insecurity. So we have rising rates of food insecurity in the nation and here in Massachusetts. We have a shrinking population of people who can easily afford and access food, and a growing population of people who can't easily access and afford food. And that's growing by leaps and bounds. There are more middle-class people that are food insecure than ever before in my lifetime. And who's hit hardest? Our communities of color. Systemic racism, institutional racism, these are root causes of the problems within our food system that are leading to poverty and food insecurity. Other challenges with our food system, and again, you caught a lot of these, but yeah, we're a couple generations away from being really closely connected to where our food comes from. We saw big ag in the chat, and I note that here with, on the bottom left, we've got a reliance on big ag to deal with a growing population and a need for food, but a focus that's on profits and supports extractive agriculture practices on the land and for labor and for animals. And we're facing rapid climate change. Again, we're learning how to farm in the face of climate change. There's a session on this, I think, next week. And we've got to do that fast, right? So we also have an insatiable appetite, and I saw this in the chat too, for subsidizing the foods that make us sicker, that really contribute to a health epidemic and burden the healthcare system with avoidable healthcare costs related to diet-related disease and illness. And we have an over-reliance on charity models that are meant to be short-term fixes, and it's something that we've become over-reliant on. And the lines at food pantries grow ever longer. And we tend to be feeding the need instead of shortening that line. Those are terms from Big Hunger. So we have a lot to fix in the food system. And sometimes it's helpful to look at other industries that have been innovative in the way that they've approached solutions to the challenges that their sectors face. And I want to bring two of those to your attention. And they are energy and healthcare. So they've both been able to leverage incentives to invest in sustainable solutions. So from the energy side of things, Massachusetts was one of the first states in the nation to adopt a renewable energy portfolio standard. And this standard sets a goal of 35% renewable energy forms for electricity by utilities by 2030. And what the standard has helped to do, well, and let's recognize too that energy, like food and healthcare, is a shared cost, right? We all pay into that system. And so we all have an investment in finding the solutions. We all in some way share the risk. But the standards do influence the behavior of the actors in the energy field to invest robustly in the solution, because if they don't reach this goal, they face fines. And so there's both an incentive and a penalization to this program. And this means that it behooves them to invest in solutions. So you wonder why you get calls from your utility about a solar program, or you want to learn more about the tax credit program. It's because they want us, the utilities want us adopting renewable energy because it helps them reach their goal, right? So it's pretty holistic in its approach. Healthcare is another sector that I look to as for inspiration. And particularly in Massachusetts, I look at the Accountable Care Organization model, and so ACO, the ACO model, and also to the funding that's provided in the last few years from the Flexible Services Fund. So the ACO model is a model that came from a movement by the government to address the rising costs of healthcare, to improve health and decrease the cost of care. It's a model that works through coordinated care, addressing the whole of the patient's health, so the social determinants of health. So not just their physical health, but the other components of their health as well, as an approach to healthcare. And it also is a shared risk model. This means that with those two goals that we talked about, improving health and decreasing the cost of care, if they achieve those goals, they save on the dollar, they're able to reinvest in themselves. If they do not achieve those goals, they pay on the dollar, right? And so again, here we see a system that's based on incentives and penalization to motivate creative and innovative solutions to a big problem. And the Flexible Service Fund in particular, which is money that's managed under the Mass Health, under Mass Health, is for accountable care organizations to address two leading causes of the rising cost of healthcare: food and housing. And so food insecurity and housing insecurity. And this fund has poured millions of dollars into the ACO system to help them invest in sustainable solutions to address housing insecurity and food insecurity. And the result of that is 3 years of really innovative pilot work across sector, forcing the healthcare industry to work with farms, to work with housing, to create long-term solutions to this problem. So next, I want to turn to some examples of actual programming that's working in Massachusetts to work across sector and work in more innovative ways to come up with sustainable solutions to food insecurity. Because again, I think food insecurity is one of the main challenges of that our food system faces. And we're going to look at About Fresh. We're going to look at the Food Bank of Western Massachusetts and Just Roots. So we'll start with About Fresh. About Fresh, for those of you who don't know, is a Massachusetts-based nonprofit. They have a healthy food access mission, and they got started with mobile food trucks that operate in the Boston neighborhoods. And they were looking to address purchasing power as a barrier to healthy eating. And they did this through a program that they launched called Fresh Connect. And it actually started back in 2014 in collaboration with healthcare partners. So where they situated their mobile markets was outside of healthcare clinics, not exclusively, but some of their markets were situated outside of healthcare clinics. And eventually they had medical practitioners coming out and saying, how can we help to pay for the food such that our patients can come out and get food from you? And so they did something that's pretty typical in the produce prescription world, a paper voucher program. This is how they started back in 2014. And so the medical practitioners would prescribe a voucher to the patient, and the patient would have to come out to the market and use the voucher. Lots of administrative headaches associated with the paper voucher program, hard to collect real-time data, hard to understand whether the program's actually working and meeting its goals. And so they needed to do something better in order to meet the needs of both their customer and the payer, healthcare. So they endeavored and they did launch a prepaid debit card program. And that's the new evolution of the Fresh Connect program. They needed to develop a card that would work for people, be easy to use, but also be easy for the medical field. So easy to prescribe, just as easy as it is to prescribe blood pressure medication. They could also coordinate that medication with a prepaid debit card, a debit card that has the patient's name on it, giving them agency about how they're spending their resources, their dollars, to buy healthy food. And they also needed to provide a card that had the ability to provide data in a secure way through a HIPAA compliant, within a HIPAA compliant environment back to the healthcare partners, because they needed to know, is this program being utilized? And is it having an impact on health? And is it decreasing food insecurity? And they also wanted to know, what were people buying? What kind of foods were they buying, and from where and when? And so Adam, who was running this program, he and I talked, and he was talking about these unexpected allies that they found in trying to develop this program. And they were in the tech sector and the finance sector. They ended up working in partnership with FIS, which is one of the world's largest payment processing companies. And I asked him, how did you start to work with them? And he said, they cold called them. And so they called lots of companies, but they ended up working with FIS. And why FIS? Because they had the capacity to give About Fresh what they needed, but they also were really, and why were they interested? They were interested because it was breaking new ground for them. This huge multinational company found it really intriguing that they were going to be able to develop a debit card for a local nonprofit to work across sectors between food and health. And that was interesting to them. And so they signed on, and they're partners today. About Fresh, the program, why I find it inspiring is I think it offers us a bridge to facilitate long-term sustainability investment in our food system by the healthcare sector. And that's really important when we're talking about real sustainability in terms of solutions. What else? So where are they today? The debit card is available to people. They can use it to buy produce right now. In the future, they're going to expand to provide the opportunity for patients to buy even more food as long as it's healthy food, and they'll dictate the terms of that. They're in 20 mobile markets, 1 grocery store chain, the Daily Table, and they're at 6 winter markets. But they've done so well, and they have so much demand for this, that they're actually going to be working with a major supermarket chain coming online in Boston, and that's in December, and they're going to be statewide by January. So a lot of advancement there with this innovative program. And I think it's a fantastic example of cross-sector collaboration that benefits our overall food system. So next we'll look at the Food Bank of Western Massachusetts. My colleagues in the food bank world often say to me, we want to put ourselves out of business, and we want to figure out how to food bank differently. And this is a relatively small program that I'm going to talk about, but I think it's an important one because I think it is a step forward for the food bank in terms of thinking innovatively about how to food bank differently. And in this case, we're talking about a collaboration between the Food Bank of Western Massachusetts and an accountable care organization called C3, a policy advocacy organization called Project Bread, and a farm organization, Just Roots, and a number of distribution partners. What the food bank wanted to do was what the healthcare partner wanted to do was offer a local food program, or at least a healthy food program. The food bank, endeavoring to do things differently, wanted to offer a local food program. And so they reached out to us. We were able to provide them with an off-season produce box in some of the hardest months to get healthy food, November through May. And they were able to work with a bunch of distribution partners so that they could deal with the distribution barrier. So how are they working differently? They are not relying on the food insecure population to make the choice to get to a food pantry to get their food. Instead, they're connecting directly with the food insecure population through a healthcare partner, and they're getting food from a farm partner, and they're getting it to the patients through a distribution partnership. So it's a nice example, again, of a cross collaboration and starting to work differently by working with different partners. And now Just Roots, and I'll spend a little bit more time on this because it's where I spend my life's work. So Just Roots, like About Fresh, is a food access focused organization, but we focus entirely on local food and primarily through the CSA model. We've developed, as Winton shared in the beginning, the leading CSA model in Massachusetts serving SNAP customers, and it's also a HIP available program, or HIP ready program. The program is unique in that it does run year round. And in some cases, we're offering not just produce, but also local proteins. We're also offering resources, not just recipes, but sometimes cookware and bilateral customer care. We collect a lot of data on the program because when we're talking about cross-sector partnerships, partners want to understand their return on investment. And we all want to understand the efficacy of our programs. Are these programs working and are they sustainable? So Just Roots collects data on our CSA, and we've been doing this for years. And we see outcomes like what you see on the slide: improvement to health, eating more fruits and vegetables, cooking more at home, on and on and on. Improvements to mental health, emotional health, physical health, more connected to community. So in terms of the impact on the social determinants of health, we see that our program's really working. We also have an impact on food insecurity, high rates of food insecurity for members coming into the program and lower rates as they participate in the program. And as I mentioned, it's a SNAP and HIP eligible program. And why is that important? It's important for a couple of reasons. Number one, we need to be inviting people to participate in the local food system. And one of the ways we do that is by helping them understand how to leverage the benefits that are available to them to participate. HIP is a great example of good public policy that benefits the food system because it emphasizes local food purchases by SNAP customers. And it also offers a new customer base for farms that had to, up until HIP existed, really market their food predominantly to upper income members of our community. And now they have a new market with lower income members of our community. So Just Roots had looked at its data for years, but in our case, we needed to find a new ally, just like About Fresh. And it wasn't finance, it was a medical doctor. So we worked with a research doctor to actually run a 2-year clinical trial on our CSA. And we did that because we also had our sights set on healthcare as a payer of our program. Why? Because our program was not one that would easily scale. It worked for us, it worked in our local community, but it was based on private philanthropy. We were raising the dollars to make the program work. And that's not scalable, and it's not a sustainable solution to the food system. So we needed to move it to a more fee-based structure. Who was going to be the payer? Who had the same goals and pains around where this program might fit? And our answer was healthcare. To be taken seriously within the healthcare sector as a small organization, we needed to invest in research, and we did that. And after 2 years, we did find that our program improved health, decreased food insecurity, and saved society dollars. And we used that information through publication in a couple of medical journals to open up doorways to cross-sector partnership with healthcare partners. And it worked. In 2020, we partnered up with Boston Children's Hospital, accountable care organization, to launch what will be a 3-year pilot program, and it's called the Farm to Family Program. And it connects through a direct referral program with healthcare, our proven CSA model with food insecure patients of the ACO. It's doorstep delivery of local food, produce and proteins, of resources, recipes and cookware, and customer care to 150 food insecure patients in the Hampshire and Hampden County areas. And that's important because it helped us to grow. We were an organization that was focused in 1 county. Now we're focused in 3 because of this healthcare partnership. And because we had really high rates of success with the program, 95% retention and good impact on health and food insecurity, we started to get demand for growth, to scale even more. And we were excited about that, but that meant we needed even more partnership. We needed more healthcare partners to get across the state. And we needed a farm partner because we couldn't grow more food for more people. We needed other farms to help us grow and distribute the CSA. And we found that partner in World Farmers. World Farmers is in Lancaster, Massachusetts, and they represent 300 immigrant and refugee farmers that are growing food in Massachusetts on shared land. And this year we launched a new way of operating for us. So again, working differently. Instead of doing all of the components of the program, we're doing some. We're handling enrollment, communications, data collection, but our farm partner is handling the growing and distribution of the food. So it's a really great example, again, of how we work together and how we work differently to make more success with a program that worked, that is now more sustainable than ever. So this slide represents all of the partners that Just Roots is working with across health sectors and farm sectors. And we're serving now over 400, or by 2022, we'll be serving more than 400 food insecure patients through this program, all with local produce and protein, all benefiting the food system. And we couldn't have done this alone. We had to do it together. We had to work differently. We had to invest in how and in the learnings and stick with each other along the way. Let's see, let's take a look at quickly the 3 examples we just talked about Fresh, Food Bank of Western Massachusetts, and Just Roots. What makes these partnerships tick? So we know that the healthcare sector is a partner for all 3 examples, and that they had a problem to solve, rising cost of healthcare linked to diet-related disease and illness. And so we look at, I'll use About Fresh at the top as an example. You need to understand what your superpower is. What are you best at? What do you have to offer as a solution to the food system? In About Fresh's case, they had mobile markets. They had good distribution of mobile markets, but they had a problem to solve. How do they have easy and convenient purchase power available to their customers? And so they had to partner in order to solve that problem. So they partnered with finance, tech, and healthcare. And now they've got their solution, the prepaid debit card program, which is now a prescriptive food program solution. And so I've outlined in this slide the superpower of each organization, what their problem that they were trying to solve, how they solved it through partnership, and what the outcome was. So when you're analyzing your opportunities to work differently, this might be a framework to think about. Now, when we talk about partnership, sometimes we can think about how difficult, does that add more layers, more complexity? Yeah, it does. But I think in the nonprofit sector, all too often, we think about partnership as competition instead of collaboration. And we want to stick in our lane and protect the funding that funds our program and protect our reputation because we're best at our program, how it is. But I think I've emphasized enough through the presentation that there's no one solution that's going to fix all the problems in the food system, that we really are only going to get to sustainable solutions that address poverty, food insecurity, and don't negatively impact society, environment, or economy if we start to work more collaboratively together. And partnerships are really, for me, some of the most meaningful part of my work. It really feeds me because, again, this work is hard. And so I asked some of our partners for reflections. I know why, for Just Roots, for example, I know why our program works. And I know why it's important for me as an actor in the food system. But why is it important to the partner? And so I asked all 3 of them, World Farmers, Boston Children's Hospital, and one of our partners under Partners Accountable Care Organization. So World Farmers, I talked with them. And what they shared with me was this partnership, why is it meaningful to them? It provides them with a stable year-round market for the farmers of Flatsmentor Farm. And it provides them with the ability to get more food out to in a different area, Eastern Massachusetts in this case, and both cultural foods and mainstream foods. It also provided them with an opportunity to really have a fair opportunity to be part of the food system and to work with a brand new sector, which was the healthcare sector. And we see in this quote on the slide from Henrietta, their executive director, she's reflecting that a lot of partnerships that they've had in the past come at them with doubt, come at them with, can they do it? And why this partnership works is because we came at it as, what can we do together? It's built on trust, it's built on transparency, and it's built on really respecting the superpower of each organization. Boston Children's Hospital reflected to us that this partnership is meaningful to them because compared to other interventions, this CSA program that we're running with them offers them an opportunity to reach the whole family, which is very different than a lot of medical interventions that are patient specific. The other thing she mentioned to me was that they really love that our program is SNAP and HIP eligible because they see that as sort of an off-ramp for if someone becomes uneligible for the program for whatever reason. Now we've empowered them. Now we've taught them about how to use these other public resources to continue to engage in the food system and to improve their health. And then finally, we talked to Melissa at APP, and she's on the operations side of things, so she's not in direct contact with patients, but she gets really fun quotes. And there's one in the middle that's bolded from a child who told their doctor, we get a mystery box every Friday and we make food with it. And so she hears that kind of feedback about what, and it emphasizes why the program is important, but she also reflected, similar to BCH, that a whole family medical intervention is really important, and that this one offers, in her words, a unique ability to address long-term health issues that are facing their patients. And I'm not sharing these quotes for bragging rights. I'm sharing them to emphasize how powerful partnerships can be and how meaningful they can be in this work along the way. So let's see. Okay, I went faster than I thought I did, but we're at breakout groups. So take a deep breath. We just went through a lot. I'm just going to review. So we talked about a framework that you can use in your work to think differently of what does it mean to work on the whole of the food system, even if we're working as individuals, and how do we partner to work together towards sustainable solutions? We looked at other sectors for inspiration, energy and healthcare. How do we incentivize and penalize programs such that we all become investors in sustainable solutions? We looked at 3 examples that are operating right here in Massachusetts at cross-sector partnerships relating to distribution, to finance, to tech, to farming and healthcare that are working towards solutions to our food system challenges. And we emphasized the importance of partnership throughout. So for breakout groups, what I'd love to do is have you all just think about, you've heard a lot, we've talked about a lot, how might this help you to think differently about your work? Do you think you'll take those tools back? Is it possible that you start to work them into your work culture? Do you already think about a triple bottom line, or has this helped you to think differently? What partners might you be inspired to think about working with for problems that you're trying to solve now that you have a more holistic view of the food system? So with all of those things in mind, we're going to break you out into groups.
Jessica?
Yeah.
There are some questions in the chat. Can we do that first?
Oh, I forgot about the Q&A. I'm sorry. I didn't have a slide for that, so I went forward. Yes, of course. Let me go back to something that's prettier to look at while we do Q&A. Let me pull up the chat. Give me 1 second.
I can summarize for you.
Okay, go for
it. There's been a lot of chatter. So I think one of the initial things came up when you were talking about prescribers and particularly the connections with the healthcare providers, and questions around the learning curve for those prescribers. What are the barriers to getting them to be aware of and willing to talk about local foods, about seasonality, about bioregional foods with their patients?
So what I'm hearing is, within the medical field, how do we make it, what are the barriers to making it easy for them to integrate local food into what they're prescribing?
Yeah, how do you manage to convince them, because they're not doing it on their own? So what are the incentives and what resources are needed to bring to bear on the prescribers to get them to participate in something like this and to really talk about local foods?
Yeah, well, a couple of things come to mind. It's really important to find a champion, right? So what that might be, the dietitian, that's low-hanging fruit. They know about the role that food plays in health. And so it's, sorry, I was just looking at the prompt. So finding a champion, but also remember about the accountable care organization. Is the healthcare partner that you're looking at, are they part of an accountable care organization? Are they a member of an accountable care organization system? Because if they are, again, you can talk with them with their own language. They have that shared risk. They have a shared goal that you might have around improving health. And they're doing it because they also need to save dollars because of the rising cost of healthcare. But one of the ways to do that, and one of the ways they're being measured, is on reducing food insecurity. So that's not something that should be new to them. And finding the right person to talk to that understands that is their goal, and it's a shared goal. So finding that common ground, and then finding the champion that is interested in talking and being inside the system that can champion what you're talking with. And that might be a nurse. It might be a specific unit, maybe prenatal, for example. And also then, where do they have the resources? So if they are working under the flexible service program, there's lots of money that they can use to stand up programs, but they might not know what's available to them. So if you have a program that you think could work with them, then you know about a piece of funding that they could use to help fund it. If they're not operating under the flexible service program, what grants do they have or what funding are they using to address food insecurity? Because no matter what, if they're in an ACO, they are forced to look at their food insecurity rates. So they have to be doing something. And so I think it's finding your championing, understanding that you have shared goals, and starting to talk their language about and understanding where the funding can come from. And then pointing to data. So they need to understand, are they going to have a return on investment? And when looking at, even if you run a CSA, you don't have to go run a 2-year research study. You can take a look at the findings from the Just Roots research study and say, hey, CSAs make a meaningful difference and they can help reduce food insecurity. This program is something you might want to look at. Or you can look at lots of the other programs like About Fresh or any kind of voucher program or gift card program that might be more amenable to them. But you need to be ready also to talk about the technology investment that's needed to often to be able to work seamlessly with healthcare. But there's different ways to do that.
Can you talk a little bit more about that data, how you collected it, what information you decided to collect and why, and then how you're using it going forward?
Yeah, I mean, there's levels of data. There's things that we need to know, and there's things that we don't need to know as a community benefits organization partner. So like we're not seeing people's, personal information, right? So there's, you have to work within a HIPAA compliant, in a HIPAA compliant way so that there's certain patient information that's protected. So we want to know as an organization, we want to know, did the CSA get to the home? We want to survey and ask, is the amount of food correct? Are you using all the food? Is it making a difference on food insecurity? Are you cooking more? What other foods would you like to see? How are you feeling mentally, emotionally, physically? Those sorts of things. Do you feel more connected to your food system? So we're going to be asking a lot of the same questions, even with our Food is Medicine program, as we are with our home-based CSA. Our medical field partners, they have a lot more questions. Like they're going to be looking more at biometric data and asking more personal information about the families to assess the efficacy of the program. And so we're not looking at, blood lab results and things like that. But they're able to understand, is their health improving depending on their specific diagnosis? And they're able to understand if food insecurity is being impacted by the program. And those are the 2 measures of success. And they're going to be the ones that are going to be able to look at the cost of care over time and see if that cost of care is going down.
Thanks. And there was one other question on the costs of the CSA and managing the costs to keep it affordable. Obviously, you've got resources coming in that help subsidize the costs of the shares. One thing I'm curious about is keeping in mind that affordability. Does that affect your management practices or anything on the farm as far as what goes into production?
Well, yes, in some ways I can answer that by, so we only grow on 5 to 7 acres, which is a relatively small amount of land to grow for, a rising population within our program population. And so we have to be careful about what we can grow and how much we can grow so that we can make sure we have food. Our CSA, it needs to be affordable, but it also needs to be sustained. We need to be able to get the food to the customer, unlike maybe your traditional CSA, which if someone doesn't pick up, oh, well, it's like, no, this is a food security program, right? So our farm manager, Meryl, she's going to decide what can we grow most efficiently on our farm and who do we need to buy from other local farms in Massachusetts that might be better at growing certain things that our land isn't suited for. So potatoes is a good example of that. So potatoes, we will grow early season potatoes and fall potatoes, but we're not going to grow the potatoes that you're getting in, July and August because it takes too much land and potatoes are really pest prone. And so it takes a lot of, it would cost us a lot of money to grow potatoes for all of our communities. So we partner with a guy who's really good at growing potatoes, who's down the road from us. And so we look at both what we're growing from feedback from our customers. What do they want? A staple isn't a staple isn't a staple. But also what can we grow most efficiently on our land to meet the needs of our farm, but also our customers. In terms of affordability, so that's one way that we can make sure that we're keeping the cost reasonable. I won't say down. And then it's a mix. So over the course of the season, you're trying to hit a certain value. You don't have to do that in every single box. It's over the course of the season. So high value items, low value items, and getting that right balance so that you're able to prove that you've reached that value. And we track all that data, so we know that we've done that.
And then a last question about cost, the operating budget at the scale that you're at, getting some sense of that, and then understanding maybe percentage-wise of how much of a subsidy is really necessary from the healthcare folks to keep the program viable.
Yeah, I mean, right now, our healthcare partners are paying the full price of the program. So it's we have sort of two models, right? Our home model and our food as medicine model. And so our home model, we subsidize at a rate of about 40% or so of the CSA. And we do a sliding scale. So low income qualifying members will pay the least, and we have to fundraise from the private philanthropy the rest. And they can tend to use SNAP and HIP combined to cover the cost of the CSA that they are on the hook for. Within the food as medicine space, because of the flexible services funding, it's robust enough to allow our healthcare partner to pay the full price of the CSA for the customer. But they don't have to pay the full price because we want to be the payer of last resort. They want to be the payer of last resort. So again, the uniqueness of our program, patients that are enrolled into the program can use SNAP and HIP to cover part of the cost of the CSA, and Mass Health in this case would cover the rest. If they don't have SNAP, if they don't, if there are certain barriers that are keeping you from using their SNAP or HIP, Mass Health will cover the full amount. But I guess I would add to that, over time, what happens if tomorrow the flexible service fund goes away? The healthcare partner loves this program. They want to continue with the program. They might have some money to invest, but maybe not as much to invest. That's where SNAP and HIP become even more important, because our patients, generally speaking, are eligible for SNAP and HIP, whether they're on it or not. We can help them get enrolled and help them to learn how to use their resources, stay engaged in the local food system.
Great, thank you, Jess, and thanks for your talk. I think now we can do breakouts. If you want to put the breakout slide back up there and give us any last tips. I think Brittany's going to put the breakout instructions in the chat and send us off on our way for maybe 15 minutes or so, and then we'll come back together to reflect on what we talk about during the breakout session.
Yeah, and I would just ask facilitators if you could be prepared to bring back highlights from your group when we come back together again.
All right, Brittany, you can start them up. If you're not seeing something, click on the breakout rooms tag on the bottom of the screen and head off to your room.
If you could just speak up, we'll go around and just share out the highlights. We probably don't have time for every detail, but share out the highlights based on the prompt. So what reflections we had, what ways do we think we might work differently? What inspirations did we take? How might we partner differently as a result of what we heard today? So in my group, we had a great discussion, and we heard, we talked about feeling inspired, because oftentimes this work is very overwhelming. And a lot of times we focus on the challenges and the doom and gloom of the brokenness of the system. And so this, what we talked about in terms of the examples that were working really well were in a positive way, were really helpful to inspire continuation and persistence in the work. Also talked about sort of finding reassurance from what was heard about, and really emphasizing more deeper collaborations, working together and redefining relationships, particularly in the supply chain, and to keep local growers in business. Real opportunities within the food hub sector to really commit to local food. We talked about really thinking more holistically about the system now, having seen the framework, in particular around partnerships, like more inspiration about who we might partner with. They also talked about being clearer about really being specific about what problems are we trying to solve, instead of thinking about everything, like really honing in on that superpower and that pain or the problem, and then using that as inspiration to partner with various folks that we might not have thought about. And then inspiration in understanding how, because finance is such a big part of how we can do this work, and distribution and transportation are such big barriers for especially small farmers to participate in the larger food system, that in robust ways, that, hearing some of the examples of how to leverage dollars from groups that have incentives to support programs like ours, that was inspirational as well. And I'm just going to share one example that came up. Angel was in our group and was talking about how much infrastructure the food banks have to handle produce. And I brought up the funding that was recently announced in the ARPA funding, and so much of the money, so many of the millions of dollars being allocated and earmarked for food banks. And how could we inspire food banks to think differently about how they're going to use that money for the greater food system, using the framework that we talked about? For example, if they adopted the renewable energy portfolio standards of the energy sector, and they decided that by 2030, they're going to be at 35% local. How would that change how they operate to be more holistic in their approach to including the local food system and leveraging those $38 million that they're going to be in receipt of? So those are some of the reflections from our group. And I'd invite the next group, maybe Joshua.
Happy to. We didn't have nearly enough time. Oh my gosh. One of my takeaways certainly was I want to be directly coordinating with all of the people that I was talking to. So some really interesting things came out of our discussion, and I'll try to keep it brief. One was centering sovereignty in our understanding and decisions about partnerships. So making sure that the people for whom the food and the industry that is producing it, that the people are able to control their own food, their own culture, and their own destinies. Another is infiltrating the blue sports coat decision maker crowd, getting into these hospital groups and these grocery store meetings about how sourcing is handled, and finding out that people may have a very different economic and cultural lens and are less interested in the triple bottom line, but being able to utilize issues like the relatively rising cost of distribution from afar and gas prices to get people who may not be invested in a triple bottom line to understand that this affects their economic bottom line, to get them to change their minds and start thinking about things the way that we might. On another again, interconnected but different point is more nutrition education for doctors. Getting more allies in healthcare will absolutely help us to get more of our food into the hands of people who need it. And to that end, just identifying what data we need for our diverse partners, and then generating it, figuring out what we can show, how we can demonstrate the real effects of what we know our programs are doing, so that we can show the partners, so that we can start getting our products in all the different places we need them to be. Love to talk more. Don't feel like I have time. So I'll kick it to Rochelle.
All right. I got ping-ponged and from room to room and didn't quite catch a lot of my group's really rich discussion. So I'm going to share a sentence or two, and then I invite anyone to jump in and share the richness of everything that I missed, because I definitely hopped in at some juicy stuff, but I don't necessarily have the context for it. So some of the things that I did hear is just like a hunger for partnership, and that this conversation being like a really resonating environment for people to be thinking about like what kinds of partnerships feel important, and how to be kind of getting outside of the ways that we've been thinking, and wanting to partner more, and thinking about making sure that partners across and farmers across the I think Dylan, you were speaking to partnerships with farmers, and making sure that through those kinds of partnerships and being a nonprofit, that we're making sure that throughout this process, as we engage with the local food system, that we're really providing fair pricing, and making sure that we're leveraging dollars to have the ultimate impact on farms be fair pricing for their produce, and that's a hard thing to be competitive with the rest of the food system. Heard some cool connections between Daily Table and Fresh Connect. So some of these projects that are already in place, having the opportunity to be impacting some of the people who are already in the room. So those were some of the exciting things that I was hearing. Would love to invite anybody from the group to share a little bit more.
And if not, I think Becca.
All right.
Sure. I also had to ping pong a little bit, so I am going to invite the folks in my room to share out if I missed anything, but I also heard a lot of really rich excitement about what you had to say, Jessica, and some folks being really excited to take back the lessons learned to new projects that they're starting in their own work. And, an interest in getting the healthcare industry more involved in their own work and starting relationships with local farmers to get their products into soup kitchens and healthy, nutritious meals. So, and I think that there was a general thought that, farmers respond to market demand. And so if we want, certain products and certain culturally relevant foods, then we need to start making those asks of our farmers and supporting them to do that.
Winton?
I think Christine was going to speak for Brittany's group.
Yes, thank you. So some of the key takeaways were examples of how a group like Goodwill, who doesn't work in food, would be taking on the role of transportation in an area. So there was a lot of collaboration, also housing units, having mobile farmers markets. So the idea of thinking outside the box was key with what you said, Jess. The other key pieces that we really loved was around finance, not just finance, seeking grants from finance in a banking institution, but looking at them as collaborators in a bigger partnership at a regional level. And also working with energy. We love that idea in our area, and technology. We hadn't thought of marrying the two and thought that was brilliant. So great job. And of course, the healthcare, working in collaboration in different ways, and the research. So all those are the key takeaways that our group was really excited about. Thank you.
Thanks, Winton. Or Emily?
Thanks, Jess. Yeah, we also had really great discussions in my group. And we started off talking about two of the members of my group shared their work working with community farms out in Eastern Mass that are predominantly focused on hunger relief. And both these farms either donate 100% or a certain percentage of their food to local food pantries and hunger relief organizations. And so they're doing fantastic work of addressing the need right away. And so they're starting to think about how can they create other models that are helping to reduce that or shorten that line, as you were talking about earlier. And also thinking about how the amount of land that they are able to grow on is a barrier. And so how can they partner to scale up their models and build partnerships with other farms. Another important piece of the conversation that we had, and feel free other members of my group to chime in too, was how all these different partnership models that were discussed are fantastic and are bringing really innovative solutions to some real issues in our food system. And how can we leverage our our voices, our power to improve wages and make sure that farmers and essential workers are paid fairly for their work, so that we're also shortening the line in that sense, in that people are paid well and they can already access healthy food without needing to rely on SNAP and HIP. So really, really great discussions there.
Thanks, Emily. Whitman, you got the last one?
Yeah, I mean, we had a great group of people who, by the time we were all done introducing ourselves and talking about our projects, the time was nearly up. Talked a little bit about the power of food policy councils, which certainly bring together partnerships in a somewhat more formal way. We talked a little bit about schools and the importance of networking with schools and partnering with schools, whether it's to find students who are interested in coming out to farms to learn, or being able to provide education in the classroom. And talked about, we're good at networking with other nonprofits, but we need to be thinking about private sector as well, restaurants and folks like that, thinking about issues around equity. One person was talking about partnering with a local tribe because they want to make sure that they're being more inclusive. I think one of the sort of underlying things, and I've heard this thread before as well, around it's partnerships and networking is something that doesn't show up as an obvious step towards your deliverables for your funders. And I think it's something we don't give ourselves enough time for, and you're never quite sure how you book that time. And it's something that is a learning curve, both for funders and for ourselves as nonprofit leaders, to make sure that we value that time spent and that we commit enough time to it, because none of us are able to do this stuff on our own.
Thank you, Winton. Thank you, everybody, for sharing with us from your vantage point, what you heard, how you might go forward from this conversation. Feel free to take in what I've got on the slide as I make some closing remarks. Before I do, I thought of one thing that I should have shared earlier with what the first question that came out of the chat, which is how do we get the medical field more involved in prescribing local food? And Food as Medicine Massachusetts Coalition does have some high goals for that, and the biggest one starts with reaccrediting medical schools and institutions such that it requires a robust food as medicine curriculum, which our medical field graduates are not. They're not receiving that today. So it starts with way back there, before they even graduate, as they're going through school, making sure they understand the connectivity between how we grow gut health and people's health from there. So I wanted to just share that before we left. But as a closing, I just want to, again, thank you all for spending your time with us today and being in this work together. I'm really wishing you luck with this work. The finish line might not be in sight, but we won't cross it if we don't work together. So looking forward to working with many of you as we continue to address the challenges through collaborative solutions. So remember, I hope you'll be able to use the frameworks that we talked about today in learning how to work differently. And I'll be excited to learn about the new partnerships that you're able to forge. I'd encourage you to keep in touch. And I wish you, and I'm just really grateful to you. Go forth in your work. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Jessica, and thanks everyone. There's a link in the chat for how you can register for next week's sessions, and we hope to see you all there. Enjoy the rest of your day and have a great weekend.